And welcome back, friends, family, freaks, weirdos. Hello. It's so wonderful to have you here again. Hi. This is the Cult of Inquiry podcast, episode number 2. And since this podcast is brand new, that probably means you're brand new to me and to the podcast. So I just want to say a warm hello to you, whoever you are, wherever you are, and give you a quick little blurb, if you will, about who I am and what this podcast is about, so you kind of know what to expect from it. And then we'll go ahead and dive into the content for this week. I'm really excited. It's going to be killer content with more on the way. I've got a whole list of stuff coming up, but I want to just kind of let you know a little bit about what to expect, and then we'll go ahead and get into it. So my name is Dave Jolly, and I am a coach. I'm trained in hypnotherapy and NLP. I'm a total nerd for personal development. I love it. I've been studying it for, a good solid 10 years. On the path before that as a student of spirituality and esoterics, I've studied a lot of Buddhism, a lot of Hinduism, a lot of Eastern spirituality, a lot of Greek philosophy as well. And I also just love and think there's a power and a beauty. And I've had so many great experiences of good conversation in my life. And there's something healing and magical that happens when you get a couple people together, 2 or more people together, and just start riffing on ideas and really opening up and exploring different, avenues of thought and thinking and inquiry and looking at trying to understand the self or the world or life or whatever it is. And I feel like I've had so many of these great conversations that have touched and impacted my life so much. And so I wanted to turn that around and give that to you. And I wanted to offer that up. And, at the same time, I'm also a creative. I'm an artist. I'm very rebellious. I'm very free-spirited. I'm very kind of iconoclastic and a free thinker for sure. And I know a lot of my friends are too. That's kind of the world I travel in quite a bit, is those kinds of people. And I realized that a lot of my friends are hungry for personal growth. They're hungry for healing. They're hungry for change. They're hungry for shift. They're hungry for waking up, for blossoming spiritually, or whatever it is. And that there's not a whole lot of personal development material out there that's really aimed at people who are tuned in that way, whose psychology is tuned towards being an artist, being a creative. And so I figured it would be a fun thing to do to kind of combine all these things together and bring together exploring what it means to be a creative in the Western world who is self-awakening and self-actualizing, who is interested in personal development, but doesn't want the woo, doesn't want the bullshit, doesn't want the fluff, doesn't want the nonsense, doesn't want the generic, cheesy, success, cliche success kind of personal development, but wants to really get at some deep core understandings of some deep core questions. And so this is really for you guys. This is for anyone out there, if that's you, who likes that kind of thing, who likes, going deep, and who likes thinking about profound things, and who likes really like having moments of epiphany and awakening, or who likes really feeling connected to exactly what the principles are that run your life and run your own psychology, and seeing clearly the world around you and understanding how to navigate with it and work well with it, harmonize with it, make friends with it, how to find your own power and your own beautiful relationship to the world around you rather than being daunted by it. And how to do all that while being this kind of open-minded, open-hearted, feeling, sensitive, fierce, wild kind of human being that most creatives and most artists are. So if that's for you, please join in this conversation, listen on. If not, no hard feelings taken. I totally understand. This is clearly not going to be for everyone, but for those of you that resonate with what I'm talking about, welcome. It's really an honor and a pleasure to have you here. So there's a couple different ways that I will be going about running this podcast down the line. And I just want to kind of tell you that up front, since this is kind of early in the history of the podcast. I will be doing some episodes where I'll be sharing concepts that I've learned from all my training and everything I've learned about the mind and emotions and psychology and how it all fits and how it all works, so that you are getting kind of real deal, hard hitting, substantial personal growth, personal development content that you can apply immediately in your life for yourself, so that you have greater insight into who and how you are and how those around you are, and really how to change, how to transform. So I'll be giving, some of these episodes are going to be very informative, if you will, where you'll be learning a lot. Other episodes are going to be much more about exploring an idea. So I will be kind of hanging up my hat of teacher and putting on the hat, so to speak, of peer, sharing an inquiry, exploring an idea with you, and just kind of riffing and talking about what it is that I've seen in that area or that topic. Other episodes will probably be interviews where I'm talking with other experts or other, just people that I have a good connection with, where it's really going to be an interesting conversation to bounce ideas back and forth. And, as I hope to do that, I hope to get people who maybe might be familiar, that you've heard of before, and get them to converse and talk about ideas in a more open-ended way than maybe the content you've heard from them before. And finally, down the line, I may be doing reviews, or, whether or not I do that here on the podcast or maybe on the YouTube channel, I'll be doing reviews of other personal development teachers, ideas, psychology teachers, stuff that I've taken in where I've paid for the course or I've gone and done the thing, and give you kind of an honest review, like no bullshit take on what I think about the content of these various schools of thought within the larger world of personal development, so that you kind of have, some ideas of where to go for different resources along the way. Further down the line here, I will also be offering, just so you know, a Patreon that's not up and running yet, but I'll be offering a Patreon that on the back end will also have probably more stuff like Q&A and some free personal growth courses in different areas or topics of interest. So let me know what you'd like courses on, things you'd like to solve problems in or heal or grow beyond. And I will gladly consider, making a course around it. And those will be free on the back end of subscription to the Patreon. So that's all coming down the line in the future. And I think that's it. So let's go ahead and dive into this week's content. So the question for this week is the following: where is it that you get your immersion from, and how does it impact your life? I've been thinking a lot lately about reward systems in the brain and what it is that each of us finds personally rewarding and fulfilling. And I've been thinking a lot and looking at, in myself and in people around me in my life, what it is that they're motivated to do habitually. What is it that they're driven to do compulsively, where the momentum of their habits is so strong that it's almost unbreakable? Habit is profoundly resilient. Habit is something that really shapes our life, right? In such a deep way. The things that we're driven to do over and over and over compulsively really make up the majority of the time that we spend. And if you think about why we do something habitually, it boils down to reward. It always boils down to there's something we get out of it. There's some reason that we do these things over and over and over, and that reason is the reward. And what I've noticed is that one of the most rewarding things to a human being is the experience of being immersed in something. So when I say, where do you get your immersion? What I mean is, what is the thing or the things where you get lost in it, where you get absorbed in it, where you absolutely just feel yourself going into autopilot and love to just fully let yourself go into it? I guess this is kind of appropriate for Pisces season. It is Pisces season right now. For any of those of you out there who keep track of that sort of thing. And Pisces in astrology is all about getting lost in the cosmic oneness. It's all about immersion. It's all about getting absorbed into the profound emotional spiritual nature of life, right? And so in this time of year, we tend to get absorbed into things more easily. Pisces is also known, incidentally, for those of you keeping tabs out there, for if not getting absorbed in, the beauty of life or the divine nature of reality, getting absorbed, if that's kind of, not there in a Pisces person's awareness, they'll get absorbed into relationships. They'll get absorbed into addictions. They'll get absorbed into bad habits. They'll get absorbed into art. They'll get absorbed into anything, right? It's kind of the Piscean nature to get absorbed into the things. And while that's true for Pisces, that can really be said for all of us. I think if you look closely at your life, you will see some area or areas where you get absorbed into things. Whether these things are healthy for you or not, you do them. And when you get absorbed into them, you find it rewarding. You find that experience of getting absorbed is so comforting and enjoyable, whether it's letting your brain go offline and you go into autopilot, or whether it's getting absorbed into something really intense, like making a piece of music, performing, dancing, sex, working out, whatever it is, you'll find that the areas where you get absorbed into things tend to be the things that you want to do over and over and over because they're so rewarding. And this is one of those areas of personal development that I think is rarely spoken about. And so I wanted to just kind of give you a few of my notes on what I've noticed about immersion in my own life and what I think about it, and also kind of give you some notes on what we know about it in terms of psychology and the science behind being immersed into things, and kind of makes a couple distinctions for you. So let's go ahead and dive into it here. So when I ask you, where do you get your immersion in life? I want to offer you the idea that everybody out there gets immersion somewhere from something in some area of their lives. I don't think there's a single person out there who doesn't find immersion in something. I think the real question isn't, do you get immersion? It's, where are you getting immersion, and what's the quality of that area where you're getting immersion? Is it a high quality source of immersion for you or poor quality source of immersion? And also, how intense is that immersion that you get or not? I do think that if you look around in our culture, obviously TV and media consumption, internet streaming is super prevalent, right? Media consumption in general is super prevalent. Why do we like media consumption? We like it because we get absorbed into it. We get immersed into it. We get to turn our brain off, and at best we learn something. We explore a new idea. At worst, we get mindless entertainment that allows us to just tune out. And when we're in that state of being tuned out, what is that but a type of immersion? You're lost in the moment. You're just kind of dull and relaxed and allowing, that media to just kind of wash over you. If you're engaged in your learning, that's also a type of immersion, right? Where you're getting into and exploring an idea and really thinking about and looking at something while you're kind of engaged like that. You're immersed in the experience of learning, in the experience of exploring an idea or a show or a movie or whatever it is, right? So I think everybody gets immersion in some area. If you're not a media watcher, people get immersion from life experience too, maybe from a hike, from a walk, from a conversation, from sex, from creating something, from practicing something, from learning something new. I think really, from being on the internet, I think any area of life can be an area of immersion for you. But what's so weird is that the same thing that you might get immersed in, other people don't, right? I always find this so interesting. Some people love to read, for example, and will get lost in a book all day and not even go anywhere near their laptop or the TV and are deeply content. Other people could not pick up a book and read for 10 minutes to save their lives. Their brain just gets scattered, wants to go all over the place. And then the moment they put on their favorite Netflix show or whatever it is, they're bam, totally into it, right? So they get immersed by something else. Some people get immersed by a good meal. They get lost in the food. They enjoy it so much. Other people just eat, and it's literally just a functional, practical thing to do that they're doing in between other tasks, right? And what I've noticed is that the quality of your life, the quality of your happiness, the quality of your mood, the quality of whether things are going the way you want them to or not, has so much to do with what you get immersed in. You know, if you spend all your time, for example, let's say you're a musician and you want to really make a living out of being a musician, and you love making music and you love creating. And clearly for most musicians, creating is an immersive experience. As you're writing, you're immersed in it. As you're playing, you're immersed in it. As you're listening, you're immersed in it. And let's say you love to do all that. And yet you only do it in little bursts here or there. You spend like maybe a couple hours writing or a couple hours playing or a couple hours practicing here or there sporadically. But what you spend most of your time doing is hanging out with friends or online or watching Netflix or whatever it is. You're actually not putting in all the time that you could be putting into your music. And even though it's a source of immersion, if there are these stronger sources of immersion, that's going to shape how good you get at music. You're only going to get so good if you put in so much time, right? You're only going to progress and really be able to build a career out of something based on, how much time you're putting into it. The person who really doesn't get immersed in TV or the internet and instead spends all their time, spends all their extra time working on their art or on their music and loves it genuinely, that's the person who's going to get good. That's a person who's more likely to succeed in that field, right? So obviously, the quality of what you get immersed in can really shape your life. It can really shape, your skill set. It can really shape whether you're ready to go or not when it's time to build something successful. It can shape your happiness. If what you get immersed in all the time is something that doesn't bring you much happiness, but just helps you to cope, just helps you to feel comfortable and tune out, you're just going to be postponing dealing with what makes you unhappy, which a lot of people do. It's super common. And by postponing, you end up feeling just less and less happy because you're not progressing at anything that matters to you, right? So I hope I'm making the point here pretty clearly that everybody gets immersion at somewhere in their lives. And wherever it is that you get immersion in your life, if that's a low quality source of immersion, that's going to be something that radically shapes your life for the worse. And if you choose higher forms of immersion, that's going to radically shape your life for the better. But this also raises an interesting question. How do you change? Let's say you're addicted to low quality sources of immersion and you get absorbed easily into things that aren't good for you and don't really serve what you want. But you're kind of so habituated to that you there's something better that you could immerse yourself in and lose yourself in, and yet you don't. How do you change that? How do you move that over? I know that there are ways. I know you can repattern yourself, but it's interesting to note where the reward systems are in your life and where they're not, right? So sometimes we can have an ideal, we can have something we want to achieve or do, but if we're really honest with ourselves, when we're doing it, maybe it's rewarding, but it's not rewarding enough that it becomes a compulsion or something that's very compelling. Sometimes it's not rewarding because it takes more effort, it takes more energy. And a lot of times the brain likes to conserve energy. It likes to automate as much as possible and spend as few calories as possible putting out effort. And so we'll gravitate towards the easy win. We'll gravitate towards the easy thing that we can get lost in rather than really leaning into building and creating something that will give us perhaps even more immersion, but takes a little more effort to get there. I would submit to you as well that immersion is something that is super rewarding to the brain. That immersion is something that the brain prefers to do and loves to be engaged in. The brain loves to get lost in something that it finds interesting and fascinating and compelling. It's kind of what it does best. And all that being said, I do think it's possible for a short period of time to have no sense of immersion. And usually what I've noticed happens for myself and happens for other people around me when they lose immersion is that they tend to kind of feel lost and purposeless and restless and scattered and unfulfilled and kind of depressed, maybe even anxious a bit. But what's funny about that is if that becomes a habit, if that becomes too prevalent or too common, I think the brain can actually even go into a flow state or an immersion state that way, where the brain starts to habituate to feeling anxious, distracted, lost, confused, and then reflects inward. And then you see, or maybe you've experienced yourself kind of getting lost in thought and trying to figure out your problems and thinking about them over and over and ruminating, that kind of a thing. And that can become its own kind of form of immersion. People can actually get immersed in feeling disconnected, if you will. And the problem of disconnection and the problem of purposelessness can be its own weird, strange reward. And I think this is one of the ways that people get stuck in kind of a general malaise or maybe like a low-grade depression or anxiety, if you will, that we see so common in our culture, in our society, where people don't know what they're doing, don't know what to do, don't know what way to go. And they kind of get stuck there, right? I've certainly been there myself, and they're not engaged and they're not learning, they're not growing, they're not exploring, they're not giving a gift, they're not receiving, they're not engaging their friends, they're just kind of spinning their wheels. I think that's because the brain starts to get a reward and get absorbed into that experience of having a problem to solve and stays there. I think it's also worth mentioning that immersion has different degrees of intensity. So we can have something that is a very mild form of immersion. Like say you're watching Simpsons reruns, and maybe you're a Simpsons nut, so this wouldn't apply to you. But if you've seen them all and you know the jokes and they're fun and they're funny and you like them, but they're not your favorite thing in the world, you just throw it on just to kind of have some background noise or have something to kind of watch because you don't really know what to watch and you don't really know what to do with your time. You kind of get immersed in it a little bit, but kind of not at the same time. That would be like a very low degree of intensity of immersion. You know, by contrast, if you are, let's say you are writing a piece of music and you are so passionately, intensely engaged in the moment of giving birth to that piece of music and nothing else has your attention and you're lost in it and hours fly by and it's so compelling that you don't want to eat and you don't want to take a break and you don't want to stand up and you don't want to drink. And it, like even when you try to, you go to the bathroom, you almost feel like you're on drugs. You're so amped up and like fully engaged and obsessed, right? I'm sure many of you have been there. That would be at the other extreme of immersion where you're super completely immersed in it to the point that you lose all track of time, you lose all track of everything else. And this kind of starts to introduce what I think is a form of immersion, but a more extreme end of it. And this is kind of where I'm starting to get this information of, you know, immersion being deeply rewarding for the brain. And that's what's called flow state. And I'm sure some of you have heard of flow state before. It kind of became popular as a buzzword on the internet a few years ago. And there's a lot of science to show that flow state is something primary to the brain. So just a little quick description of flow state. So flow is a state, a psychological state. You may know also by the term getting in the zone or just like completely being in the moment. It was explored in depth by a psychologist named Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, who learned a lot of great stuff about flow. So flow is kind of, just to kind of define it for you here, that sweet spot right between arousal and control. right? So when you're in that perfect place where something is challenging, arousal means, in this case, challenging. If you go too far into arousal, you get anxiety, panic, overwhelm, right? And if you go too far into control, you get familiarity, boredom, too easy, effortless, right? So when you're in that sweet spot, right, in between the two, where something is challenging, but you have the skill to do it, it's attainable, you know what it is you're trying to achieve, you know what your objective is, and you're able to just let go into the moment and completely drop all awareness of everything else and be fully focused on that one thing, and everything else falls away. That's a state of flow. Some ways that you know you're in flow is that you experience timelessness. So everything else just disappears. Hours fly by like minutes. You're just completely in the moment, or the other way around. It can feel like some people experience this with, say, sports or physical activity. Like the smallest amount of a moment can feel like so much time inside of it, because your attention is so amped up into the detail of the moment that it can feel like, 10 seconds is forever. Another signpost that you're in flow is that it's effortless, right? So you just know how to do it. You don't even know how you just know, and you just do it, and it just flows out of you. I know certainly that my best communicating, my best writing, my best painting, my best drawing, my best music, my best playing, typically when I'm at my best and I'm firing on all cylinders, I'm in a state of flow. There's immediate feedback. That's another huge key piece to flow state, is that you get immediate feedback to what you're doing. So you're interacting, you're in that sweet spot between arousal and control, where something's challenging enough, but you have enough control that you can actually engage it. So, if you have no control and it's arousing, then you just feel overwhelmed. And if you have too much control, you feel bored. So you're in that sweet spot again. And you have this immediate feedback coming back to you. So every action you take, everything you do has an effect, has some sort of response that happens, whether it's, say you're dancing, you have a dance partner, and every time you move or every time you respond, they respond. That would be a sense of flow. If you're painting, obviously, every time you move the brush, you're seeing the new color added. You're seeing how that adds up to this whole sense of the piece that you're creating coming to life. Another thing, and this is really indicative of flow, is that it becomes an area of life or an experience where you do it for its own sake, right? So you're doing things because you enjoy them, not because of what they can get you. So when you're making music because you love making music, you're singing because you love the feeling of singing, you are jogging because you love to move, you are whatever it is, writing, thinking, whatever it is, if you go into that flow state and you're doing it for its own sake because it's immediately rewarding to do it, because you're compelled to do it, not because you'll make a lot of money or you'll look great or you'll have nice abs or whatever ridiculous reason we put on all the motivators we have out there, but you do it just because you love to do it. That is a huge part of flow. We don't go into flow when we're hung up on the outcome. We don't go into flow when we have anxiety about the future. We don't go into flow if we're doing it for somebody else. We don't have flow if we're doing it as a compromise. We go into flow when it's just something that's natural for us to do. It's interesting. There's a lot of science that shows that in a flow state, the brain cross-communicates with other parts of itself in new and different ways, much like what you would see in a brain scan from LSD or mushrooms or psychedelic, where these areas of the brain that are normally kind of segmented off and don't normally communicate with each other start to do so much more. So the brain becomes more whole, more active as a whole piece. So flow obviously can become this very intense thing where you're in the moment and you're completely absorbed in it. And I think that that's kind of at the higher end of being fully immersed in an experience, in a moment in your life, right? But I do think it's possible to have a non-flow state, lesser form of immersion. So I think there's a gradation between very low immersion and flow state at the high end. In flow state, a couple other things I want to just kind of rattle off here for you. You learn faster. You actually burn new pathways of learning more quickly. So if you are trying to learn a new skill and you're able to get in a flow state with it, for example, when I was young and I was learning how to skateboard, when I would hit flow state, all of a sudden I would be pulling off all these tricks I didn't know how to do, and they would just wire themselves into me, and all of a sudden I could do it. But before that, I'd try for hours and weeks and days and months and nothing, right? But you hit that flow state and all of a sudden your body just figures out how to do it, and it does it automatically and it wires it up. So you learn faster in flow. In flow, they found that people who live with more flow states in their lives are happier on average. A person could be maybe poor financially, kind of under, in poverty or under where they would like to be. A person could have all kinds of other areas of difficulty, tough relationships, things not going their way, health issues. But if they have one area of life where they're able to get into flow state, great example would be like a surfer who lives on the beach with no money, but goes surfing every morning and loves it. Those people are reported to be much happier on average with their life. They tend to report much more life satisfaction. Flow also gives you increased creativity. You come up with ideas you've never had before. You spontaneously generate new ways of doing whatever it is that you're doing, and you're much more creative. You get absorbed in the moment, obviously, and it delivers the most personally meaningful experience. And I think that this really gets at the heart of immersion in general. I think the reason we get drawn to immersion, why we like to be immersed in things, is because those things typically have meaning for us. They're personally meaningful. So when we find immersion in something, especially to the degree of being in a flow state about it, those tend to be areas of life that we find meaningful, that we find something profound, that we find something poignant, something beautiful, something rewarding, something curious, something fascinating in, much more than other areas of life. And the funny thing is, someone else who doesn't get flow state around that same thing may not have that same sense of this being profound or meaningful to them, but to you, it will be. And I would be a little remiss, to be honest with you, if I didn't acknowledge that, from my point of view, in my opinion, immersion it's a type of spiritual experience, or maybe the other way around. A spiritual experience is a type of immersion. Maybe both are true. But I do think there's an inherently spiritual quality to being immersed in something where you feel more connected to life as a whole, and you feel more connected to what's inside of you. The deepest, best part of you tends to come out when you're immersed in something for real. If you're in a low-grade immersion, like let's say you get immersion from, again, tuning out from the TV and eating junk food, which some people do, I wouldn't really qualify that as a profoundly spiritual experience per se. But I do think in general, just that feeling of being absorbed gives us that sense of connection to life as a whole that is really at the part of the essence or at the core of the spiritual experience. And so if you stop to think about it, it's kind of no wonder if there are all these benefits inside of immersion. You get to automate your brain, you get to tune out, you get to let go, you get to get absorbed into the moment, you get to be happier, you get to be more engaged, you get to get immediate rewards, you get to let me see what else. You get to learn faster. You get to be more creative. You get to more deeply get the juice out of life and get what's most meaningful to you at a nervous system level, not even at a thought level, but at a nervous system level. What's meaningful to you, you get immediately. It's no wonder how, if you're not taking charge of that and finding good sources for your immersion and good ways to be absorbed into life, it can own you. It can run you instead of you running it, right? And this kind of brings me full circle back to the initial question, which is, where do you get your sources of immersion from in life? And how is that working for you? How is that treating you? And what's the impact it has in your life? this dawned on me while I was meditating, which I think is an excellent source of immersion. And I think the whole reason that people meditate is that they get deeply immersed in the moment, just from sitting there and breathing, which is kind of amazing if you stop to think about it. That just sitting and breathing, something that we do every day, can be so profoundly rewarding that you're lost in a state of ecstasy, that it becomes something that's compelling and something you want to do every day rather than just something you do passively, right? And I was meditating, and it dawned on me that it's so rewarding to just sit there and just get absorbed. And that experience of getting absorbed is, as a creator, as a creative person, that's always been at the heart of my art. That's always been at the heart of my music, of my thinking, of my philosophizing, of everything that I've pursued that's been of value in my life. That experience of getting absorbed into it has always been right there at the center of it, compelling me forward into doing more of it. And I think it is one of the sweetest, best, juiciest, most wonderful aspects of being a human being. It's one of the reasons to really live and be alive, is to explore how immersion is something you can get and how masterful you can get about your immersion. By the same token, at the exact same time, most of us aren't taking charge of that sense of immersion and aren't taking ownership of where we get it from. We just kind of passively discover ways to get immersed in life, and then we wonder why the quality of our lives is so disappointing or so frustrating or so shallow or hollow or empty, or where the fuck all the time has gone in our lives. How has it happened that years have slipped by and we haven't achieved our goals? How is it that we used to be so much more prolific at our art? How is it that we used to be so much more engaged in the world and now we're not, right? I think that's all about low grade, low quality immersion. So that's kind of the idea I wanted to impart here with you. I hope you take something from that. I hope that's interesting to you. Maybe I'm just a kook riffing on some bullshit, or maybe there's something to this. Either way, I'd certainly love to hear from you and hear what you have to say about it, hear what you think about this idea of immersion being something that is a controlling factor in your life. See if you agree or disagree, and we'll go from there. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for joining me on this podcast. And I really look forward to next week, where I'm going to be diving into a 2-part series on values and really starting to understand what it is that drives you and your motivation personally, and how to get at that, how to begin to change and shift and take ownership of your motivation and demystify what it is that motivates you. And then the second part of that, we're going to look at values in the world, so you can start to understand more clearly how the world is organized and what makes people tick, what makes groups of people tick, what makes nations tick, et cetera, et cetera. It's going to be some great content. Hope you enjoyed this one, and I look forward to giving you the next one. And please subscribe if you enjoy this kind of thing, and hit me back if you have any questions or comments. Take care.